Jordan Scott Pace is a father, a husband, a former teacher, and a real estate professional. Now he wants to take all of those experiences to Columbia to serve the residents of House District 117, Berkeley County. I talk one-on-one with Jordan for this edition of Quintin's Close-Ups. And if you haven't already, subscribe to my YouTube channel and like Quintin's Close-Ups on Facebook. Jordan Scott Pace, welcome back to Quintin's Close-Ups.
Thanks for having me back.
Oh, you're very welcome. I know I've interviewed you, I believe, twice for Quintin's Close-Ups because obviously at the time you were a Republican candidate for South Carolina House District 117, which covers Charleston and Berkeley counties. And now you're back as a Republican candidate for the 2022 cycle. As a matter of fact, on December 8th, 2021, you said this. Did you hear the news? Over the weekend at the Berkeley County Republican breakfast, I announced that I'm running to defeat the socialist incumbent of State House District 117. And unlike the unsocialist incumbent, that is, I will not use this position as a stepping stone for higher office. I don't have those aspirations. Let me ask you, as you refer to the Democratic incumbent, Crystal Matthews, what exactly is socialist that she's done in Columbia?
Well, I think she describes herself as that. It's not something that I'm trying to deride her with. She describes herself as a Democratic socialist and campaigned with Bernie Sanders all around South Carolina. So that's something she's applied to herself. But she wants extremely high taxes, higher spending, abortion on demand. I mean, you name it, go down the list of Bernie's platform and she's all for it, which you can find on her website, I'm sure, because she's running against Tim Scott for U.S. Senate, and what I think will be a Sisyphean endeavor.
Is this a conflict of interest in your mind for her to run for the State House and for the United States Senate simultaneously?
Yeah, absolutely. To me, as a resident of House District 117, it seems kind of like a slap in the face to be regarded as her backup plan.
What exactly is her backup plan?
I don't know. You'd have to ask her. It seems like when she loses Tim Scott, she expects to be voted back into the State House. But here's the thing. District 117 is no longer Berkeley and Charleston counties. It is entirely Berkeley County.
Right.
So the district's changed quite a bit.
And how? And tell me exactly. I know that you list all the things that she's been voting for in the lines with Senator Bernie Sanders. What exactly has she done in Columbia that you will align yourself with, that you have actually endorsed?
What are the things that she's done that I like?
Yes, sir. Some of the things. Yes, sir.
That's hard. I mean, that's tough. She's voted for all the bigger spending. She supported tax hikes. Thankfully didn't come up, but there was talk of tax hikes coming up. She signaled she support that. There's not a lot. I mean, she's against Second Amendment. It's a pretty stark difference between us on policy.
And what exactly are your policies?
So I'm a student of economics. I work for a small business, and I used to teach personal finance and ethics in high school. So all those things have led me to the belief that people generally make good decisions for themselves if you let them make decisions for themselves rather than the government make their decisions for them. So in that regard, lower taxes. South Carolina has the highest tax rate in the South. We have the highest income taxes in the entirety of the South, which is a shocking thing. I also work in real estate, small business I work in. When people move here thinking, from New Jersey or New York or places that have higher taxes than we do, and they're thinking that's the South, it's Florida, zero income tax, or Tennessee with zero income tax, or Texas with zero income tax. North Carolina's lowered their income tax twice in the last 10 years. And here we are, they get here, and all of a sudden their retirement money is much smaller than they expected it to be when they moved south. So that has been a common realization for folks, particularly in the district that 117 is now. It's new neighborhoods with a lot of new folks. So that's something I'd like to tackle is lower, if not eliminate, the state income tax. That's for one. I think parents should be in charge of their students' educations. The bureaucracy that the state education system has become, people are starting to wake up and realize, I went to government school 12 years of my life, graduated from government school. And I saw it somewhat then, 15 years ago, but it's even grown as much that the the level of indoctrination versus education. I mean, the average South Carolina high school graduate reads on between the 3rd and 5th grade level, the ones that graduate, and a great many don't graduate. And so we have a lot of problems as far as the basics. Meanwhile, we're doing all this, what's it called? Social, emotional learning initiatives, basically ethical indoctrination from a secular standpoint, rather than teaching kids how to read and do math, how to do their personal finances. One of the things that I taught that wasn't in a government school was how to do a checkbook, how to balance your budget, something the government's not very good at. The state of South Carolina has increased their budget by more than $1 billion a year for the last almost 10 years, which is starting to get out of control.
And how much would you lower the state tax by?
The income tax, if it was up to me, if I can wave the magic wand, we go to zero, just like Florida, Texas, Tennessee, Washington State. Washington State's not exactly a bastion of conservatism, and they have a 0% income tax. I think we can do it too.
What would you replace the income tax with?
Nothing. Cutting spending would be the ideal way to do it. Like I said, South Carolina's budget has increased by more than $1 billion a year for about 10 years, and every single year we have a surplus. I think this year's surplus was like almost $1 billion. That's without the federal emergency COVID stuff. So every year for, 5-6 years, they see these multi-hundred plus $1 million surpluses and trying to figure out what to spend it on. But I'm looking at it saying, well, if the government's collecting more money than the budget, maybe we need to not collect that much money and let people keep it in their pockets, particularly when inflation's going up, 8-10%. Gas prices are shooting up. People, particularly on the lower end of the economic spectrum, need that money in their pockets more than the government does.
How much of the federal emergency money has District 117 received?
Not a whole lot. And that's kind of a hard question. When they portion this out, the district lines were different, right? So making those calculations is pretty, at best, it's a guess. So we don't have the exact numbers on it, and partially because the district lines have changed, but also because they haven't finished figuring that out.
Right. Mm-hmm. Let me ask you this. How did your relationship begin with the constituents of District 117?
Ask it again.
Yes, sir. How did your relationship begin with the constituents of House District 117?
So I've lived in District 117 for a while. Obviously, I've run a couple times at this, tried to unseat the Republican incumbent in 2018, ended up defeating him in a primary at 2020, and got real close with the previous district lines against the current incumbent. So this time we're pretty hopeful with the new district lines that it's going to be pretty good compared to last year or 2 years ago. I've taught, like I said, when I taught high school, it was within the current District 117. I've sold people houses. I've sold houses for people out there, helped small businesses find space within the district and around the area. So I'm pretty tight, go to church. Right here in Berkeley County, have for, like I said, 10 years plus. So it's pretty deep.
Does people know, but do people in District 117 know Jordan Pace, the candidate?
Well, not as much as they will by November, but yeah, I mean, we got friends, we got supporters. We've had an outpouring of volunteers telling me since we announced in December, hey, let me know when you start knocking on doors. We want to come help more so than the last time. So it's been a very encouraging response.
What did you? Okay, let me ask you this: what you didn't do in the last election that you should have done that you're doing now?
So last time we knocked on about 20,000 doors. Now, some of those are repeats, obviously, because only 16,000 people voted in the election. So we spent a good chunk of money. I think it was $40,000-$50,000 in mail and literature, things like that. We could have spent more money. I don't know that it made a difference in the climate and the distribution of the district being the way that it was. It was a lot more blue than was suspected by us, by the state party, but, by outside observers. Thought it was a purple district when it turned out it was slightly too blue. So even if you knock on everybody's door in the district, which seems like we did, couldn't quite make it. So that's why I'm so very encouraged by the district lines being adjusted, this being a Berkeley County seat in its entirety. I think we got stand a much better chance.
When did you know that that particular district was switching from blue to red?
So when the district lines became official, Governor signed them back in, I think it was early December.
Right.
We were looking at it. I've been paying attention to it, advocating for a more balanced district than it was for a while with the legislature, and they went with it to better represent the people in Berkeley County. So once we figured out, hey, this is what's going to wind up as, it had some changes here and there, and the governor wound up signing it. That's when we made the announcement.
What are the last figures of the population for District 117?
Like how many people?
Yes, sir, the population.
Yeah, so they're roughly, there's about 42,000 people per House district in the state is what they aim for. Realistically, there's probably more than that in District 117 because it's such a high growth area. And this is Nexton, Sangaree, Carnes Crossroads, Cane Bay, right? So these are the big neighborhoods that are growing fast. From my experience in real estate, I would say the chances are by the end of this cycle, so by the time they redistrict 8 years from now, 10 years from now, it'll be probably close to 90,000 people in the State House district if Nexton actually builds out everything they're supposed to build out, new county parks. Carnes Crossroads, where we live, has got another 10,000 or so dwellings that are supposed to be built. Lennar bought them a little over a year ago from the Daniel Allen Company.
Right.
And then Cane Bay's still building too. So it's going to be a lot, more than normal.
And I was just at Nexton Square on last week. But what is the pace of growth in House District 117?
Lightning fast, as fast as they can swing hammers. There's mostly single families, what's going up. There's also some commercial developments coming down on State Road. Obviously, what you saw in Nexton Square, and there's even more coming. There's downtown Nexton, which is going to be a really cool mixed-use, walkable kind of place. I really think as that builds out, the center population, median center of the Charleston area is actually going to move up to College Park Road, almost right there at Nexton.
Right, exactly right. Okay, what are the District 117's current growth projections?
Like population,
Yes,
somewhere
sir.
around 80 to 90,000 by, was it 2030?
And how could you assure growth with smart growth?
So that's up to the developers and the municipalities, the counties, the cities. They're all working together, and I think they've done a pretty decent job with it. Obviously, Highway 17 is going to get more packed, and there's only so much you can do widening wise because they're right on the edge with some properties and buildings right there. State Road is being widened, and this really goes back to a systemic problem that I've harped on for years. I know if you go back and look at our past conversations, the way the state doles out highway funding is insane. So State Road, true to its name, Highway 176 that goes from North Charleston, it's called Rivers Avenue, goes through Goose Creek, and winds up going toward Cane Bay. All right, that's where all this new growth is. They're widening it. Finally, good, great. But the county's the one having to pay for it. So Berkeley County citizens, the 1 cent sales tax, is having to widen and improve the state road, owned and maintained road that our gas taxes are supposed to go fix. So they raised our gas taxes, right? Over and over and over again. We've had them raised for several years, since 2015. And a lot of that money is sitting in the account. And then rather than the state going and widening that road, the citizens of Berkeley County are being doubly taxed, like taxed twice over to fix that road. The system's broke. I think a lot of that's going to change. Obviously, Senator Leatherman's passing away. He kind of had very tight controls over the Department of Transportation and the Infrastructure Bank. So I think now is a good chance for things to get better, for hopefully the state to loosen its iron grip on infrastructure and hand that out back to counties to handle.
Would you eliminate the State Infrastructure Transportation Bank Board?
Yeah, realistically, over time, I think that's one way to do it, is fully integrate it into the Department of Transportation Like that's how almost every state has it. Almost every state that has a infrastructure bank like we do has it under the purview of the Department of Transportation. But along with that, we need to make the Department of Transportation accountable to the voters of the whole state, rather than 2 or 3 legislators who appoint the whole thing, which has been the case the last 20, 30 years. So putting that under the governor, there's been a bill brought, I think last year, Josiah Magnuson brought it, the year before that, right. Stuart Jones. Somebody brings a bill every year to do this, to put Department of Transportation under the purview of the governor, so the governor can hire or fire the director of DOT. That way we can all hold the governor accountable. So if the roads continue to be awful, over the course of 4 years, we can fire the governor and get a new governor who's going to appoint a better DOT. So it's not a politically driven affair. That highway funds aren't used as a weapon against other legislators by leadership to get what they want.
What exactly do the legislators want from the Department of Transportation?
Depends on the legislator. Kind of infamously, Senator Leatherman, not speaking ill of him, he was taking care of his constituency in his district, but when he ran the show, there's a highway in Florence that got hundreds of millions of dollars spent on it to widen it to a 4 or 5 lane highway using very expensive concrete rather than asphalt, and it wasn't being used. I mean, I think it was the South Carolina Policy Council had one of their staffers go out there and lay down in the middle of the highway at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, right. And there were no cars. So they spent all this money because Hugh Leatherman was the king at the time. Before that, Glenn McConnell ran the Senate. He ran the show. And Charleston got promised a bigger, newer, extended 526, and we never got it because his term ran out as king. Before that, it was what was his name? David, Speaker of the House, David Wilkins. David Wilkins in Greenville. When Greenville got all this funding to revitalize downtown Greenville, which looks amazing. Part of that were those highway bypasses, right? 385, right. All that came from DOT. David was king. David got what he wanted. That's how banana republics work, right? That's not how it's supposed to work equitably amongst the whole state, where engineers come up with a list of these bridges are most dangerous and need to be replaced, regardless of politics. These roads are overfilled. We need to fix them, expand them, etc., what have you. Basically, let the professionals do it and not the politicians.
I know it's not in your district, but do you believe that the extension of 526 is dead or alive?
Functionally, I think the best analogy I've got is Weekend at Bernie's. So I think it's probably dead, but it's still walking around because there's people holding it up. You've seen that movie back in the 1980s, Weekend at Bernie's. If you've ever seen that, that's basically what it is. This guy, they carry this body around, pretending like he's still alive, put sunglasses on him, dress him up. It's a dumb comedy from the 1980s. That's basically what we got. The plans for 526 are 15 years old. They're not adequate. If they were to build those plans today, it wouldn't make a hill of beans difference for traffic on Johns Island and James Island. And that's coming from people that live on Johns Island and James Island that have told me that aren't adamant, Nix 526 people. They just realistically look at it. And the fact that it's unbelievably expensive to accomplish very little with those same plans. So all the politics involved with it, people have entrenched themselves, tribalized themselves within that discussion. Again, it's not my circus, not my monkeys. I live in Goose Creek, and I represent Somerville and Berkeley County. Right. I don't go over that way that often, but right. From an outsider's perspective, somewhat, I think maybe you relook at the plans, see if there's a better way to do it that's less impactful, less expensive. Maybe there's not. I don't know. I'd say let's check that back to the engineers to reevaluate.
So, and this might be a basic question here, but what should be the alternative?
I don't know. That's what I'm saying. Let's check that back to the engineers and let them evaluate. There's a lot of things, flyovers. One of the big things that held up 526 was the fact that the federal government came in and said, well, that's not an interstate if the speed limit's 45 miles an hour, right? So you can't get federal funding for it. So that's what I mean. There's all these very nuanced complications that have infiltrated their way because it's taken so long. And the reason it took so long is because the king who was in charge at the time was Glenn McConnell, switched hands to Hugh Lubman. Hugh Lubman didn't care about 526. He cared about Florence and things in Florence. So the funding gets pulled from the infrastructure bank. Because of all these political games with the infrastructure bank and DOT, that thing never got accomplished, whether good or bad. Some people like the fact that it never got accomplished. You know, the next 526 folks, so I'm friends with many of them, and praise Lubman for it. So my goal, rather than, I'm not an engineer, so I don't know what's going to fix those problems. My goal would be to get the politics out of it as much as possible, rather than come up with that situation again.
And speaking of infrastructure, what is the existing infrastructure repair that will accelerate economic growth in South Carolina?
A lot of that's going to be alternative routes and kind of what you mentioned, better planning. So the thing that helps traffic better than anything else, better than widening roads, better than new flyovers, extensions of 526, is having people live closer to where they work, where they shop, and where they go most often, right? So if you're living in Mott's Corner or Somerville, Ridgeville, somewhere kind of on the outskirts, because that's what's affordable, and you got to drive to West Ashley to go to work, one, that costs you a lot in gas, but that's a lot of time, and that clogs the roads up, right? So there's a lot of people that have to do that. If the places of work were able to move closer to their employees, and I deal with this literally every day when I'm helping business owners find commercial space, they're taking into account where their employees are coming from. Like, hey, I've got this rock star employee. He lives in Latson, and the spot on Ravenel, well, it's cheap and it's nice, compared to everything else. I'm going to lose this worker if they got to drive to Ravenel every day from Latson because traffic's just abysmal. So businesses make these considerations, particularly small businesses, take these things into account. And as the market is allowed to do this, so if we have smart free market policies, even down on the local level, to allow businesses to move to, that is what's going to help us. Boeing, before COVID craziness started, one of the things they did was shift their work schedules, right? So it wasn't necessarily 9 to 5 shifts. They moved their work schedules around so their workers weren't coming to Boeing with everybody else. They'd come an hour early, hour late, something along those lines. So the big employers, that's a big help. And nothing the government did to do that. Like the county didn't come in and say, you must do this. Boeing looked at it, said this is good for our bottom line because it makes our employees happier and it's better for the community. So given the opportunity, businesses by and large will do what they can for that effort. What can the state do? State can let its hands off of the 44,000 miles of roads that it controls, which is, I want to say it's the 6th largest road network in the country for a state to manage. South Carolina, the 6th most roads per mile of any state, behind like California, Texas. It's crazy. And it's a political weapon. So the state, if DOT no longer manages, tens of thousands of half-mile increments of little roads and neighborhoods, we C-block that money. A program that already exists where the state hands X amount of dollars per mile to the county to maintain those roads. All but 3 counties in the state, policy council is studying this, can maintain roads cheaper, faster, and better than DOT. And those 3 counties are like Abbeville and Kershaw, where there's more deer than people. It's like, okay, that's understandable. The state can handle those. We can figure that out. But by and large, counties can do it better. So let's let the state let go of it. Let counties figure it out, because those county engineers live there and they deal with it all the time. Those, like particularly in Berkeley County, county council supervisor, they're held accountable much closer than the DOT commission, which nobody votes for. It's appointed by a handful of legislators, most of which we can't vote for. That policy, no one's held accountable in that regard.
Now, what is the record for infrastructure construction in South Carolina?
What do you mean by that?
Yeah, what is the record for infrastructure construction in South Carolina, particularly in District 117?
Mm-hmm. So, the state road's probably the best example. State road runs straight through, like we were talking about earlier.
Right.
That's something the state should be maintaining. But Berkeley County has had to come in and do that. Henry Rand Boulevard expansion, the state road, state should be doing it. County's having to do it through that 1 cent sales tax. So Berkeley County is being double taxed to maintain roads that should have already been taken care of. Highway 17, same deal. Like, that's a state road. Any improvements to it probably gonna have to come from Berkeley County, and it's taxing Berkeley County because when the county, when there's developments or something on a commercial level, if a developer, commercial guy wants to come in, build some manufacturing, build some a place where people can work, so they don't have to drive as far. The county doesn't have enough funds or the bandwidth to help them build that infrastructure on that small scale. There's small roads, sewage, things like that, because they're having to take care of the state's screw ups.
Yeah, and what's more important for District 117 right now? Building new homes and commercial space, as you mentioned, or rehabbing, expanding, and better utilizing the existing homes?
Both are happening. They're not mutually exclusive. I can tell you, like in Goose Creek, for instance, a lot of those 1950s, 1960s builds in Boulder Bluff, Holly Hill, on that side of the railroad tracks, where a lot of Navy folk used to live, are being rehabbed and flipped left and right. There's not a lot of flips left. It's for somebody to come in and buy relatively cheap and turn around and sell, because nothing's cheap. But that's happening. As the price of homes increase, and incentivizes investors to find those older houses, invest in them, flip them, and then sell them for a profit. There's nothing wrong with a profit to people who need houses. So we're doing both. I think both are important, and they're not mutually exclusive.
And can you, I know you're a real estate agent there, but can you identify any housing trends in your community, such as, obviously an increase in absentee landlords, mortgage foreclosures, decreasing home values, or even increasing housing prices?
So we're seeing more as that last one. Housing prices increase, mostly because people are moving here, right? That's a good thing. People are moving here. It's like 50 people a day. Prior to COVID, it was 36 people a day for several years. It's what the Chamber of Commerce had said. So now they're saying it's been 50 people a day since January of last year. In South Carolina, it's relatively free. It's warm. It's beautiful. We got a growing economy. There's good things about it. Some things we need improvement for, we already talked about. But as people move here, we can't build houses fast enough, or housing fast enough, apartments, townhouses, whatever. So that inevitably, if you have more demand and less supply, prices increase. It's basic economics. What the state can do on the state level is try to free up capital. So, like we talked about, income tax is one thing. South Carolina has the second highest personal business property tax, which most people have no idea what that is unless you own a business. If you're a business owner, then you might, Quintin, if you've incorporated Quintin's Close-Ups, for say Quintin's Close-Ups LLC, I don't know if you've done that or not, but if you did, and you own, and your business owns that camera you're using right now, you would have to pay I think it's 13.5% property tax on the value of that equipment forever, and it never depreciates to zero. So it's the second highest behind West Virginia. It is fairly debilitating, particularly for manufacturers. But big companies don't have to worry about it, because when they get their deals, whether it's Boeing or Michelin or whoever, their big, heavy equipment, they don't own it. They lease it from the state. The state will buy this equipment, big manufacturing things that they would have to pay a lot of business property taxes on, and lease it to them at minimal cost. So that's the way they get around it. But if you're a small business owner and you own a skid steer, a forklift, or what have you, things like that, things that people need to make stuff, they get hit on all of that, on their desks, their chairs, the computers. Every single year they get a bill for it. And most other states don't. Also in South Carolina, if you're a manufacturer, you get a 10% more than everybody else, taxed 10% more than everybody else, whether it's distribution or anything, retail. So that's, again, economic law says if you want less of something, tax it. That's why they raise taxes on cigarettes, right? Ostensibly so people smoke less. Well, if we tax manufacturing more than everybody else, that means we're going to get less manufacturing than everybody else, which means people have to drive farther from their homes to get to a better job that pays more. So all of this is wrapped up together. The taxes, the infrastructure, it's not just funding it, but it's also incentivize. Like what does the state incentivize and where? And what are those unintended consequences?
What are those unintended consequences?
Bad traffic is one of them. Also lower wages. So when you tax manufacturing more than distribution, manufacturing typically pays better because you make stuff, you get a higher profit margin. Then versus distributing something where you bring it in, hold it in a warehouse, and then send it somewhere else, doesn't pay as much. So because the state disincentivizes manufacturing, wages are less, people's incomes are less. And so one way to increase those wages, increase the better jobs, and ideally closer to home, would be to get rid of the personal business property tax, get rid of that manufacturer surcharge, lower the income tax, things like that.
And what incentives would you propose if you were in the House today?
So incentives, those. I mean, as you do that, lower the tax rates and make it more equitable to everybody. When you, not to poo-poo on Boeing too much, because they have brought a lot of jobs and brought a lot of growth, which is in many ways good. But for instance, here's a better example. What was supposed to be a Bass Pro Shop in North Charleston. Now, like 10 years ago, Bass Pro Shop said, we're going to come in and build the second biggest Bass Pro Shops in the world. It's going to have a bowling alley, all this stuff right there on Ingleside Boulevard. Well, the state and the county and the city is going to give them all these tax incentives, all this money to do this. Well, the tackle shops here in Hadrell's Tackle in Mount Pleasant, for instance, was livid. And I would be too, because what incentive is that for him to trying to grow his business, selling the same stuff, struggling, when the state, the county, the city is handing his tax dollars over to his rival, this bigger, giant rival. It's taking David's stones away from him and handing them to Goliath, right? So not just taking away his defenses, but also giving it to the big Goliath that's his opponent. So not that anybody was making planes, but what incentive would there be for somebody, an entrepreneur in South Carolina, who wants to build a better airplane when he's not going to get the same deal that Boeing's got, or to build a new car gets better gas mileage, that's safer, etc., when Volvo already has all this head start specifically from the government? Like, he's paying for their head start for his competition. So I think incentives-wise, let's lower the tax burden for everybody. Income, personal business, property taxes, everything. As we lower that, we get an even playing field to get more innovation, and people's way of life also gets better along the way. It's better for everybody.
Yeah, and I want to talk to you more about that, hopefully this summer or the fall. But
Sure.
Where in the district do you identify and also develop those characteristics when it comes to residential, commercial, and mixed use?
Yeah. So 117 now is a lot of mixed use. So Nexton, for instance, Nexton Square, it's a lot of live, work, and play out there right together. We got a lot of restaurants, a lot of things like that are growing. We need, behind all that, there's going to be some manufacturing, some distribution within that area. It's starting to be built out. A lot of it's up in Jedburgh, which again is farther up, not in, so traffic's going to be better toward Jedburgh, Ridgeville, Holly Hill, out that way. So I'm overall optimistic. The market, given the opportunity, will succeed. You've seen Jurassic Park. Life finds a way. To quote Jeff Goldblum, the market finds a way. No matter what government throws at it. But it would be better for everybody if government got those out of the way, got those hurdles out of the way for everybody else too.
And how should Berkeley and Dorchester counties create a dedicated funding stream for attainable housing development through zoning and other planning tools?
The best thing government do is not get involved as far as like paying for it. So the areas of the economy we've seen the greatest rise in cost versus value is college, higher education, medical spending, hospitals, things like that, and housing. So these are all things that the government comes in, whether it's through guaranteed student loans that never go away even if you go bankrupt, Medicare, Medicaid. Hospitals and everything must do all these, crazy regulations, have to hire dozens of administrators just to maintain regulations. On the housing side, Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, FHA loans, all these things, some of which are good. I have good intentions. All of these have good intentions. But the biggest deformations we've seen in spending versus value is in those three areas. So the last thing we should do is have government get more involved in housing. The government comes in and gets more involved in housing. It's going to deform the housing market even more, and honestly make it worse. So the best thing they can do is let's relax on some of these policies about like new builds. A lot of people don't realize the cost of building a new house every 5 or 6 years goes up like 10 or 12%. Not because of the market, but because of regulations. Some of these are good, like they make the house more energy efficient, or they make it more airtight, or what have you. Like good stuff, but they also make it less affordable for people. Like my great grandfather lived in Landrum, South Carolina, on the border of North and South Carolina. He was illiterate, could not read and write. He was a brick mason. Him and his two oldest sons, my great uncles, built the house that him and his wife and 5 children lived in, and people still live in that house today. Like he didn't have to have all this engineering and architecture done. Now, is it a superb house? That's going to have a super high energy quotient and everything else? Yeah, probably not. It's a brick house that does the job of housing people that need a place to live. We can't do that today. Like that doesn't exist. That is illegal to do today. And I'm not saying we need to go exactly back to that, but I think we need to head back toward that direction if we want affordable housing to actually exist.
Where is affordable housing in House District 117?
This is what you mean by affordable. If you're going by government statistics, there's affordable housing in Nexton and Carnes based on the median income of that zip code. Realistically, most of it's going to be in College Park Road. Some of which, there's some townhouses and duplexes and stuff and apartments that are going up. Even some new ones on College Park Road and toward Tall Pines. So there are some, but it depends how you define that. And that's going back to government deformation of the housing market. Is they changed what those terms mean. So on Daniel Island, they have affordable housing on Daniel Island, but that means it's a $350,000 townhouse rather than $1 million house. That means something different in Ladson.
And how do you actually define affordable housing?
Like what people can afford. I know that's redundant a little bit, but that's dependent on where you are. If you're in Spartanburg, it's different from Ladson. If you're in downtown Charleston, it's different. It depends on where you want to live. Overall, the housing market here is higher than everywhere else because people are moving here. But what government can do, a little bit government can do, is relax those regulations on building codes, things like that, to allow more people who want to build houses to build houses.
Yeah. And I know you have to run, so I got a few more questions for you. But what is the current tax base for House District 117?
By and large, it is residential, commercial. The commercial side is a lot of restaurants, retail, some distribution. We're growing on the commercial side. There's a little bit of commercial, industrial side to it, but it is by and large a lot of housing.
Now, how much tax revenue has the state lost in the past 2 years?
Not much. They had a surplus again this year. The budget went up about $1 billion plus again this year. Some of that was federal money, but overall, the state has not lost tax money.
Now, obviously, you are a former teacher. Let me ask you this: when it comes to education, what is the retention rate for teachers in House District 117?
about as bad as everywhere else. I've got a handful of friends that are just this year leaving the teaching profession. My friends aren't actually in District 17. One's in Charleston County, one's up in Sumter area. But there's a lot of they're leaving, and it's not because it's not any one issue. The ones that I've talked to, when I was teaching at a private school, the most affordable private school in the Low Country. The teachers, we didn't get paid much, right? Way less than government school teachers did. And I'd ask people, like, why did you leave your government school position? Most of them had taught in government schools. They had the teacher's license, had an education degree. And obviously it wasn't for the money because they took a pay cut. It was the administration backed them up, like the principal, the vice principals. There was a situation where the parents were angry, the parents were in the wrong, the kid was in the wrong. The administrators would back them up. And they didn't have all the extra stuff that the government school teachers had to do. They come to school, they teach the kids, they love on the kids, and they can have conversations with the kids that they couldn't have in government schools. So that's why I'm a huge proponent of education freedom. And what I mean by that is parents and families should decide where they send their kids, and that the money that particularly the state spends on those kids is about $7,200 to $7,500, depending on the county, should follow that kid to the school they go to. There's a charter school, government school, private school, whatever. Easiest way to do that is a refundable tax credit, just like the earned income tax credit on the federal side. The mechanism already exists. On state income tax, you check a box, you say, I sent my kid to such and such charter school, such and such private school, and the state issues them the $72, $75, whatever it is, $100 refund in their state income tax. Build in a strong anti-fraud measure. Like, if you're lying about this, we find out, we're going to come get that money plus some, and you're going to go to jail. Like, it's fraud's in there for a reason, right? We have mechanisms to prosecute fraud, but to me, that seems the most equitable, easy way. And not the last 2 years have really told us this. The fastest growing demographic of families that are homeschooling is not, rich white people in Nexton. It's actually single parent African American families are the highest or fastest growing demographics of people who are homeschooling and sending their kids to charter schools, alternative schools, things like that, because they're the demographic that are getting least served by the government apparatus. So I want to give everybody the opportunities I didn't have going to government schools, to send their kids where is best for them, not just based on their zip code, but by what their kid needs.
And I'm going to talk to you more in depth with that too later this year. But should the teacher pay increase be an average of 5% over the next 2 years?
So teachers, it's not a bad thing for them to get paid more. In an ideal system, like the situation where parents can decide where their kids go, you actually get a market for education. We see this in South Korea. South Korea there's teachers in South Korea that make millions of dollars because their performance is rewarded on a market like everything else. If you make really good computers, you should get lots of money for people buying those really good computers. If you're a really good basketball player, people want to come watch you play basketball, you get rewarded lots of money. If you're a teacher and you're really good at it, you should get paid more. But the system we have now rewards longevity in the system versus success. And without a market apparatus to do that, we're not going to see any difference. Even if they paid them $50,000 more a year, I know a lot of happy teachers that would be happy about that, but they would be good teachers and teachers that are not very good at being teachers that would equally get rewarded. And I don't think that's right.
Would that figure include annual step increases on the teacher's salary schedule?
Yeah, I think, and that's mostly something the districts should handle rather than the state. The state, I want to get out of education as much as possible and let it be on a community level. So if districts want to do that, great, all for it.
What strategies do you have to retain qualified teachers in schools that have high risk proportions of obviously at-risk students?
Again, back to the market idea. I'm beating the drum to death, but given the opportunity where parents can say, like, all right, my kid's got behavioral problems, we need to go to this school. This is already happening. Go back to like the idea that the market finds a way.
Right.
Even without state support, there's actually an autism-focused charter school. I think there's one in Charleston County and one in Dorchester County that it's free for kids to come to. They have less resources than the government schools, but they have a much higher success rate, and they tailor their education to children with autism. And I would love to see more of that available for parents with those issues to be able to help their kids where the current situation is obviously not working.
What is the success rate for teachers and obviously the schools in District 117?
The success rate?
Yes, sir.
What do you mean by success? As far as like reading, writing, arithmetic, or college acceptance?
Yeah, yes, sir. You can talk
about
all that. Yeah,
sure. Cane Bay High School is the main high school within the district, and it is overflowing with students. So that's a good sign, but it would be a better sign if people had a choice where they send their kids. And they do. In this situation, they kind of do. People are choosing to move to these new growth areas. But government's inflexible. Even good school boards are fairly inflexible when it comes to population changes. So we see the opposite in North Charleston, right? North Charleston High School was built for like 1,600 kids, 1,400 kids, and 600 go there. So it's like half full because government overbuilt for what they needed. They're inflexible. Cane Bay is not big enough. They thought there was going to be this many, and then turns out Nexon's going to be built, and Carnes is going to be built, and everything else. So we need more. But in order to do that, it's going to take several years for them to engineer buildings, raise money, et cetera, et cetera. If we had a market system, parents backpack the money to the kids. If we know that there's too many kids in the school, some of those disaffected teachers who didn't like the system got out of the system, probably look at each other, and they're already doing this with these pods during COVID, and say, hey, look, we know there's funding here. We can get calculated $7,500 a student, just like charter schools do, and say, we can find a building, we can do this, and open a school to relieve the burden, that overcrowding on somewhere like Cane Bay, whether it's Cane Bay High School, middle school, etc., all the way down to elementary schools. The market will satisfy those needs given the opportunity to do it. So that's the best way to improve those numbers, to help those overpopulation, is to let the market do it.
How small is too small as far as class sizes, and for how long?
How small is too small?
Yes, sir.
Yes. One's probably too small. I've taught a class with one student in it because everybody was on a field trip or something. That was weird. That was awkward. it was weird for me. It's weird for the student. Strange. So one's too small. Too big. I would say probably more than 20 is a lot. I had a couple classes that were pushing 20, and there's teachers in government schools that had 30 kids in them, particularly on the lower levels. I don't see how you manage that. You can't, and obviously it doesn't work out. And it stresses them out, stresses the kids out. Nobody learns these things. It's not good. So obviously smaller. I don't want to be a dictator on that. I want teachers and families and communities to make those decisions themselves. And my job as a representative is to give them the tools and the availability to do that.
How much does it cost to actually reduce class size?
It depends how you calculate it. So to hire, the way the district does it is based on teacher hires, but it's also dependent on space, like how much space they have in the school. I don't know the exact number. It depends on the district on how much they do it per kid. I know in Charleston County, they spend, last year was like $22,000 per student per year, which is an astounding number. I think Berkeley was 16, 17, Dorchester District is about the same. So Charleston County is spending an enormous amount of money per student, $22,000 per year. It's only going up. So only $7,500 of that's coming from the state. So the rest of it's local. How much? I think this is how this would work. This is in my head as someone who's in the classroom and understands economics pretty well. Let's say my dreams come true and we backpack that money, do that refundable tax credit. School's got 500 kids. It's built for 400. At least 100 of those kids are going to take the opportunity to go to a charter school, private school, homeschool, whatever, what have you, because of that backpacking of the funding. Relieves the pressure off of the government school to have less students in the classroom per teacher. And let's take Charleston County, for example. Billy goes to Charleston County schools. Charleston County is going to spend $22,000 per year on Billy. Well, legislation's passed. Billy's parents decided to send him to Charleston Math and Science. Charleston Math and Science, they get that $7,500. That $15,000 that's left that Charleston County didn't have to spend on Billy, they get to spend that on other kids. So their spending per student will actually go up in Charleston County, in all these counties, because they can hire more teachers. And here's the great part. Another great part of it. If the county school districts have more money to spend per student, they should be doing what Charleston County's not been doing, is hiring more teachers or raising the salaries of those teachers on the local level to accommodate, basically to create a labor market for teachers. So today, there's basically no labor market for teachers. If some private schools, a handful, mostly government. If we have a market for education, students get better education, the teachers actually get better pay. If you're a really good teacher, you're going to get incentivized by the government schools, going to have a lot more money per student. By these private schools, might be incentivized to better hours or different curriculum, but it incentivizes not only the students getting better educated, but the teachers getting better compensation. So it's a win-win for everybody. Except for bureaucrats. Bureaucrats don't like it.
As far as those teachers, obviously salaries, as you mentioned, how should that be? How much should that be increased by? I should say.
So I don't want to be in charge of that. I think that I want to be in charge of letting parents and communities decide that for themselves. Right now, the state's in charge of it, so I'm going to have to vote on that more than they have now. This is my answer for that question. Long term, the only long term solution is for communities and families and individual schools to decide that based on how good of a teacher they are.
And let me turn over to obviously let me ask you this: I'll ask you this: what exactly is the fiscal equity right now in this state?
As far as can you define that for me a little bit better? Fiscal equity.
Yes. So when it comes to education, how is that?
So, particularly in education, if you're a poor kid in North Charleston, your opportunities are extremely limited compared to somebody in a wealthier zip code in Mount Pleasant or somewhere else, right? That's obvious. We all know this. The question is, why is this? And my answer to that is because the government's doing a one-size-fits-all. There's corruption at the top. Charleston County's got over 100 employees that make more than $100,000 a year that never deal with students ever. So they've got a more than $500 million a year budget at Charleston County schools, and most of the kids can't read. So this is not a picture of success, right? So to answer that question, it's not good. The equity is not good. And for 50 plus years, their solution, the government solution, is spend more money. Well, obviously, spending more money per student is not doing the trick. So I think that's why we need some innovation, some different ways of thinking to rather than spend more money, let's spend the money we're spending more effectively.
Speaking of kids, as you know, it's going on right now in the South Carolina State House, but a proposal to ban transgender students from playing girls and women's sports in public South Carolina high schools and colleges is moving to the State House after stalling twice last year. Members of the House Education and Public Works Committee didn't comment on the bill before they voted 11-2 Thursday to send the proposal to the chamber floor. I know that legislation would require athletes to compete with the gender listed on their birth certificates, according to the Associated Press and WLTX in Columbia. How many high school kids participate in high school sports in South Carolina?
I don't know the exact number on that. What I will say about that is I would vote for that bill without question. It is completely crazy to say that the swimmer situation in Pennsylvania is emblematic of that. There's a picture of the Thomas person jumping off the way everybody else would then jump off into the pool, and they are whatever he refers to himself, an entire body length ahead of everybody else before they even hit the water. So there is quantifiable, obvious differences between them that is simply unfair. So yeah, I mean, I would vote for that bill. I think they should have passed it already. As to why they didn't, I can't speculate. I don't know. I wasn't there, but yeah, I would say that's a good idea. That we shouldn't have boys playing girls sports and vice versa.
How many transgender students are actually playing girls sports in South Carolina?
I don't know. I don't know how many there are. I don't think that has to be an issue currently. If we know it's an issue in other places, even if there was zero in South Carolina, but we know that there are in states around us, which obviously there are, has been in the news. I think the legislature is in a reasonable position to say, yeah, we're going to prevent that from coming here before it gets here. That's a bad thing. We don't want that to come here, so let's nip it in the bud before it does.
Can you cite an example of trans girls in sports in your particular district, District 117?
Not that I know of, which I think is a good thing.
How many transgender students have actually applied to play sports here in South Carolina?
Again, I don't know. I don't know. It could be zero, and honestly, it wouldn't matter. Even if it was zero, that's something preventative, right? Like when pollen comes in spring every year, before I start sneezing, I start taking Claritin or Zyrtec or whatever, right? So that's a preventative thing, even before I start sneezing. I had sneezed it, still going to take it. So same principle applies there. And we want to prevent this from becoming an issue. So let's go ahead and stop it before it becomes one.
Well, let me ask you this. Should the bill address cisgender guys competing against cisgender women?
Depends on the situation. On a personal level, my wife just had a daughter, first kid. All right. If she said, I want to wrestle and, wrestle boys, then I'm going to tell her, no, you're not going to do that. Right. That's certain things in our family, like, that seems like not appropriate for you to do by our values. Now, if a government school wants to do that, again, going back to this ideal market scenario where kids, like, we can send our kid to where we want to send them, and that school says, hey, we do this. Okay, well, we're going to send our kids somewhere else. That's the beauty of that market system rather than the one size fits all, which is what we have now. Which, if somebody is in the other persuasion and they want their kid to do that, they can go find a school that does, and they can do that there. That's the beauty of a decentralized market-based system versus a top-down, one-size-fits-all government system.
Is this government overreach?
No, in this case, I think it's particularly protecting girls physically and on an opportunity level in a preventative way, even if none of it applied so far, it had become an issue here. So I don't think that's government overreach. And if we had an actual market system versus this government-controlled system, you can maybe make a case there, but we're not there yet. So we'll cross that bridge when we come to it.
Is it wrong to ban transgender girls from competing against boys in middle school and high school sports, but yet still allow cisgender boys and cisgender girls to compete against each other?
Back that up. So say that for me one more time.
Yes, sir. Is it wrong to ban transgender girls from competing against boys in middle school and high school sports, but yet still allow cisgender boys and cisgender girls to compete against each other?
In my view, it should be from middle school onward. Boys play against boys, girls play against girls. Is the best case scenario. Whether it's basketball, swimming, football, whatever.
Let me turn to the medical marijuana bill.
Mm-hmm.
Let me ask you this. Why doesn't the state just call it cannabis?
No, they should call it cannabis. Is what the medical term is. I would say they should call it cannabis. Most people no marijuana, probably better. It's more prominent in the zeitgeist, but yeah, I would agree. Cannabis is probably best.
Should the medical marijuana require a prescription from a medical doctor and filled by registered pharmacists?
So, I mean, that's the big hiccup. I don't know. The big question is, can we do that if it's still a Schedule 1 drug according to the federal government? Like, pharmacists are going to have a hard time filling that if it's Schedule 1 versus not Schedule 1. There's a lot of opiates that are far more dangerous than marijuana that are not Schedule 1 that can be prescribed by a doctor and fulfilled by a pharmacist. So that's something the federal government should handle. It's something they failed to handle this week. I mean, they wrote it was like a 400-page bill, Nadler's bill, that should have been a page long to say, yeah, this is no longer a Schedule 1 drug. On the state level, I like the bill that's passed. My friend Brian Adams, who's a state senator for Berkeley County,
Right.
He's a retired law enforcement. He was the head of narcotics for North Charleston. He voted for it. If he voted for it, yeah, I'm going to vote for that too. in something like this.
Why not just put it on the ballot and let the voters decide?
Yeah, I think that would be fine too. All the polling I've seen for the last 10 years, it said even Republican primary voters are in favor of medical cannabis, particularly if it's not going to be smoked. Like Tom Davis's bill, the bill in question this past year, doesn't allow for smoking it. It's only ingestible pill or I think maybe vape. That was kind of back and forth. You can't smoke it. So yeah, it could be put on the ballot. I'd be fine with that. But I don't see. There are forces at play in Columbia that are stalwart against it, and I have said for a long time to them, I know several of them that kind of run these organizations, this is a losing battle. I understand where you're coming from. There's ways we can address the safety issues, and I think this bill does a pretty good job of it. But it's a losing battle population-wise, and honestly, I think morally. There's people that kids really use and do use, whether it's legal or not, forms of medical cannabis already in South Carolina that would greatly help them.
Jordan Scotch Pace, I know you're so busy, so thank you so much for your time, and I hope to get you back on in the summer or the fall. Welcome back to Quintin's Close-Ups.
Thanks for having me. Appreciate it. Thanks,
You're very welcome.
Thanks. Bye.